Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for part one of our four-part series on termite biology and control. Before we get started, we're going to go over a few webinar procedures. First, everyone, please mute your line. If you become unmuted, please mute yourself. You can use the chat box to ask questions, and we'll be answering all questions at the end of the webinar. For any additional questions not answered during the webinar, or if you just think of something later, please email them to us at education@nola.gov, and this webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. Today's topic is termite biology and identification. Termite control in your home begins with an understanding of basic termite biology, identification, and behavior. And today we have two speakers giving our presentation. We have Dr. Carrie Catone and Dr. Mark Janowicki. Mark Janowicki is a research entomologist who has worked with the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board since 2020. He has always had an interest in insects and studied termites throughout his degrees, applying molecular tools for species and population differentiation. He currently leads the termite division for the city, which protects city facilities and historic buildings and trees. Mark also manages the molecular laboratory, which conducts pathogen surveillance in mosquitoes, rodents, and rodent ectoparasites, genetic resistance screening of mosquitoes and rodents, and population genetic analysis of termites. Dr. Carrie Catone has worked for New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board since 2005 and currently serves as assistant director. She has a strong background in urban entomology with the emphasis on subterranean termites. Dr. Catone managed the termite control division for New Orleans from 2011 to 2020. She received her PhD from the University of Florida in 2011 as a student of Dr. Nan Yao Su. Her dissertation work was determining survival mechanisms of Formosan subterranean termites during times of flooding. And now we'll hear from Dr. Catone.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much for that introduction. Yes, it's always a pleasure to give these webinars. I love this homeowner series. So talking about termites, I always like to start out by letting people know that termites aren't always the bad guy, right? Termites are actually very beneficial to our ecosystem, and this is something that most people don't realize. They are very unique in that they're able to recycle wood, they're able to break down wood products and release those nutrients back into the ecosystem. That is very rare for organisms to be able to do. They're also a really good food source for other animals. A lot of times when you think of like the swarming termites or even termites in the ground, you think, okay, well, amphibians and reptiles are going to feed on them, but also mammals as well. So here you can see a picture of an anteater, but also primates. Okay, it's a very good source of protein. Here you can see a chimpanzee here in the bottom center of the screen. He's actually using a tool to kind of probe into an infested tree, it looks like, and actually grab termites out. Once they latch onto that stick, he pulls them out and he'll eat them right off of that stick. So a very good source of protein. However, termites are pests when they damage things that we care about, things that are valuable to us, such as our home, right? Our homes are our biggest investments, financially speaking. So when they begin to invade our homes or ornamental landscaping, even boats, cross ties for railroad systems, when they start damaging things like that we value, then they're considered pests. And termites will feed on anything containing cellulose, even treated wood, but they do rely on gut bacteria and protozoa in order to digest the wood. So it forms this symbiotic relationship where both the termite and the gut fauna are going to benefit, right? So the gut fauna gets a nice protective home, a place to live, and the termite is able to digest wood for food. But keep in mind that, most termite species are still beneficial, even though we consider them pests. Fewer than 10% of termite species are considered pests. So termite colonies have a caste system, and each of these castes serves a specific role for that colony. So we have workers, soldiers, and reproductives, also known as alates. So the worker caste is responsible for all the damage, actually, that we see. So they're the ones that are feeding on the wood and tending to the newly hatched termites and tending to the queen. And the soldiers, as you would expect, they are there to protect and guard the colony from any kind of predator, such as ants. If you break open a mud tube, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, you'll see some soldiers come pouring out of there, sometimes ready to protect the colony. And we have reproductives, which will be the kings and queens for the colonies, and their role is to make more termites. So an alate being a winged insect, so these are what we also call the swarmers. Um, that's another name for reproductives. So when we talk about the global distribution of termites, we're really kind of talking about different kinds of termites. Okay, so each one of these pie charts in different regions around the world will show different proportions of different kinds of termites. So the blue portions represent the Calotermitidae, which are the drywood termites. The orange will represent the proportion of subterranean termites in those regions. And the gray portion will represent the higher termites or Termitidae. Now, as you can see here, we have very, scientific family names, but then we have subterranean termites here in orange, and there's a good reason for that. So there has been a recent, I don't want to call it an upset, but a reclassification of certain families trying to clean up the arena of subterranean termites. I'm going to let Mark talk a little bit about that.
So yeah, why we have subterranean termites in quotes is a very recent phylogeny that came out last year, Hellman's et al. And so really kind of getting into the weeds here for a homeowner series, but still wanted to give the science behind this and kind of explain. So this phylogeny across here is showing the relationship of all the termites, across the entirety of termites. If we zoom in here, this is where kind of the problem is. So this blue ish box in the middle are what we used to consider the subterranean termites. They were all Rhinotermitidae. The issue is that there were a couple of groups in between this group. So we had these Rhinotermitidae on top, and then we had what we called Rhinotermitidae on bottom, but we didn't call these ones in the middle Rhinotermitidae. So there were a couple other families in there or a couple other termites in there that were kind of messing up this group. So we can't have a group where we exclude certain individuals. So we had to split it all apart. So in doing so, obviously, the way the taxonomy works, the name of the family has to have that corresponding genus. So there's a genus Rhinotermes, and that's one of these termites in the top section. The ones that we're going to focus on for this are the Reticulotermes, Heterotermes, and Coptotermes, and those are in the bottom. So they had to get a new name. So we now call them Heterotermitidae, as seen here. So again, this isn't changing anything except kind of forgetting about some of these other tropical species of what used to be part of the same family as the ones we're worried about. So really more semantics. We're updating the slides, so we're still just going to kind of call them Rhinotermitidae with quotes there as these subterranean termites for now.
Yeah, so we will call subterranean termites for this homeowner series. We promise there is no quiz or exam at the end of this presentation. Okay, but we do want to be scientifically accurate. Okay, so when you scale the distribution of termites, if you scale it to abundance, take a look at how small that pie chart is for North America and how huge it is for really the rest of the world. Okay, and I know if you're here locally in the New Orleans or Louisiana area, you think, man, we have really bad termite problems. Well, there's a lot more species in other parts of the world. So this is not about economic damage. This is about abundance of termites in different regions of the world. Okay, so we are going to do a tour de termite around the world, okay? And we are going to start in Africa. Okay, so there are 5 different species of subterranean termites in Africa. There's also species of drywood termites in Africa. There's also harvester termites and higher termites in the family Termitidae, a lot of those actually in Africa. And these termites are classified based on their habitat or even their behavior as well. So starting with the subterranean termites, as their name implies, these guys will be nesting underground. They also live within living in dead trees and logs. They will build mud tubes, as you can see in this picture here on the right. And these mud tubes actually help protect them, not just from predators, when they're outside of their nesting system, when they're above ground, it will protect them from drying out. Okay, these termites are very soft-bodied insects. They're very easy to dry out. Once they desiccate, they will die. So that protects them from temperature fluctuations and a loss of humidity in their environment. They will create carton nests, and they are a pest of economic importance. Drywood termites, as their name also implies, they live within sound dry wood. So their foraging is very limited. So instead of being subterranean, where they can spread out their foraging territories across, a lot of land, they are going to be limited in their foraging areas within a single piece of wood that they're infesting. So they're not going to be constructing nests, but they will be carving out galleries within the wood that they're feeding on. But their presence is really detected most times by them leaving behind these very distinct six-sided fecal pellets. And we'll see that in other pictures as well. But this is a very distinct indicator of a termite infestation. Harvester termites in Africa are actually pretty cool. I was very impressed with them when I saw them up close and personal in person. So these termites, they will gather food for later use. So they will be bringing grasses underground, but they are limited as far as what they can be exposed to outside of their nesting system. So it gets very hot in Africa. So they have to forage either at night in the summer. In the winter, they can forage during the day as well. But a lot of times, you don't know that they're there until you see little piles of soil and debris and little pieces of grasses that they bring up from their underground nest when they take out the garbage. Right, so here we have a video. It's not playing. So this video here is, if we can pull it up. Oh, perfect. So this video here, you can see them. They're kind of going in and out of a hole in the ground, essentially, is what you would see from above. And you can see them carrying these very large pieces of grass material into their nesting system. So all you really see from above is a small hole surrounded by these pieces of grass and some debris and some soil. But yeah, you can really see them really working together to bring their food into their nest. Okay, so the higher termites in Africa, it's a pretty diverse group, right? So over 100 species that we're looking at in Africa. They have a very wide range of nesting and feeding habitats. This family includes mound building termites, so like rounded mound building termites, arboreal nest builders that will build their nest in trees, soldierless termite species such as these soil feeders, Termitidae, and there's also fungus growers, so these mound builders and Termitidae. So these are really cool termites, I think. So termites in this subfamily, they will construct these large, elaborate nests. They're these huge mounds that you can see in Africa, and they're really tough on the outside. So they're really hard to break into. But within these mounds, there is a system of galleries and chimneys that help regulate the temperature and humidity. You have a subterranean nest cavity here at the base filled with a fungus comb. Okay, and what they do there is they're actually cultivating a fungus that they can feed on, which assists in their food digestion. And the queen is housed in a queen cell within the main nest cavity. And within the queen cell, they'll actually wall her up so she's not going anywhere other than staying in that queen cell. So here on the left is a picture of a fungus comb that's inside the mound. So you can see a lot of people compare it to the structure of a human brain, right? There's a lot of different folds. It really takes advantage of increasing that surface area so that you can cultivate as much fungus as possible. And here on the right, you can see how large these termite mounds can get. And this is actually casting that we did in Africa. So we took off the very top part of a termite mound, filled it with molten zinc, and then once it hardened, you get a full representation of all of the gallery systems within the tip of that mound. So that is one way the researchers have learned to study the inner workings of these termite mounds. Australian termites, again, a lot of different species in Australia. They deal with subterranean termites, drywood termites, higher termites, and also master termitidie. So the subterranean termites in Australia, some do stay fully underground. Others build these nice round mounds. They look like dirt bubbles coming up out of the ground. And a lot of people here in Louisiana, when they go fishing, they like to take pictures holding up the fish of what they caught. Not me. I like to go places and have my picture taken with termite mounds that I've found. So I was very proud of this picture. It's the first mound that I kind of excavated a little bit. And I was really shocked at how tough that outer covering of these termite mounds are. And then once you get to the inside, it's like a nice chewy center with all of their newly built foraging galleries and stuff. So anyway, I'm very impressed with their building skills. So drywood termites in Australia, again, small colonies because they live within sound dry wood. They're not going to construct nests or live underground. They will have galleries within the wood, and then once they they are packing their galleries with their fecal pellets, which we'll talk about more later, they will push those out of their gallery systems, and that's when they're detected, is through those very distinct six-sided fecal pellets. Okay, so higher termites in Australia, it's another very diverse group. We have arboreal species that will nest in trees, in the canopies. And there are some different mound building termites here in Australia. So these are different in that there are compass termites and cathedral termites. So instead of the tall rounded mounds that we saw in Africa, we have compass termites, which will build these tall but flattened from side to side mounds where they're oriented north-south. And what that does is it prevents the termites from cooking in the Australian sun. Okay, so it'll take advantage of the warmth during the early morning and the late afternoon, but you really are not going to have that direct sunlight during the noontime when the sun is at its peak. And then there's also cathedral termites, which are absolutely massive. You can see in the picture here to scale. This is a person here, that's not me, standing next to one of these cathedral mounds just for scale. And then we have Mastotermes. Okay, so the sole living species within the family Mastotermitidie is Mastotermes darwiniensis. So this is a very primitive termite, as you can see in the picture here. To me, it even looks very primitive. It's very sclerotized. It looks very hardy. It's only found in northern Australia, and they do nest below the soil surface. And I think up next on the tour, we are going to take it to Asia. And I'll let Mark talk about Asian termites.
Yeah, we'll continue around the world. Our Asian termites, as we saw in the scaled pie charts, is a very large pie chart. So this is about a third of all species. However, many of these are thought to be synonymous. So a synonymous species is when a single species is described by two different people, given two different names. So if you find something and you don't do your homework to figure out if it's already been seen and identified and described, then you just go ahead and describe it. Then now there's two different names for it. Eventually, this will get worked out by taxonomists as they discover which one was initially described and stick with that initial name. But it takes a lot of time to kind of work your way through a lot of this. One notable example here is another different kind of fungus growing termite, Odontotermes. Like the ones in Africa, these collect material, bring it back to the nest. They use those young workers to chew up the material and mix it with fungus to make a fungal comb. And then they're eating that fungus comb, the old portions, as it's maturing, as it becomes suitable food. Then we'll make our way over to the neotropics. This one only has about 20% of our total termite species in the world. I have some examples here of ones that I was lucky enough to collect when I was in Costa Rica. So we have conehead termites, which we'll talk about more in the top. asymmetrical snapping soldiers in the middle, and then what I call the unicorn termites in the bottom. We'll, I think, cover each. Yeah, so our conehead termites, our tree termites are an Termites species. So you can see they have those nozzle-like heads. So rather than having mandibles and jaws, they use their nozzle-like head to spray opponents and anything that's trying to attack them. They live in these large nests up in trees. This is up on a tree branch. You can see it's about the size of a basketball or a little bit bigger. And this is a very hard nest. Similarly, it's not easy just to break into this. So although it's in plain sight, it's not something that's easy for predators to get into. We also have the asymmetrical snapping soldiers. So these ones have mandibles as the soldiers, but their mandibles are long and slender. And what they do is instead of using these strong jaws, they're able to get their potential energy up by squeezing these together and then snapping at another thing. It's the same way when you hold your fingers and snap them, you're getting a lot of force by pushing your fingers together. So I have a video here of a snapping soldier here in the bottom against some of these Termites that I pinned up just to see. So see they go over and see it, it'll begin to press its jaws together once it detects something nearby. It'll have that energy built up, and then it'll pop. And so this pop is able to go through and bust cuticle. It can fling things across the room if if some other little organism is there trying to get it, it can get them. But again, we'll see it'll squeeze those together and then pop. So it's doing this asymmetrical snapping. And this is actually some of the fastest recorded animal motion that they're able to conduct this. This is even faster than our trapjaw ants or mantis shrimps, many of these other very fast moving organisms. There's been a recording of this very, very fast action. Then finally, my favorite termite that I found in Costa Rica was what I call the unicorn termites. So this is in a group that rather than just having mandibles or just having a nozzle, it has both. So this is the Termitines as a subfamily of the higher termites. And it has these big sickle-shaped mandibles in the bottom, but a very long nozzle on the head. And when they walk around, they hold that nozzle up in the air and look something like a unicorn. And for me, they were a unicorn because I could never find them. So I got to the jungle and I was out there trying to find termites. And I was one of the few termite people with a group of ant people. And they were always out there finding different kinds of ants and finding different things. And it seemed whenever we split up, they would come across these and then tell me where they found them. I'd run back to that area and try to see them, and they were gone. And the reason is because these are another kind of above ground foraging termite. So they'll move their way around foraging as they go. And so by the time I got back to the same spot in the trail, they were gone. But these are pretty neat. They have both of these mandibles and the nozzle to be able to grab onto a predator or an opponent. So they use the jaws to grab on, and then they start spraying the nozzle onto the organism as they're attached on very well. Other interesting neotropical termites are some of the giant termite mounds in northeast Brazil. So this is another species in the same subfamily, Termes dirus. And these giant mounds can actually be seen from space. So this is our satellites. So this is a satellite picture there. They're 7 to 13 feet high. And they're not actually living in these mounds. They're actually digging their way through the ground, and they have to dump all of that dirt somewhere. So these are just waste piles from their underground digging. And it's thought to be the most extensive bioengineering effort by a single insect species. Over 2.3 cubic miles of dirt has been moved in this effort by these termites. Finally, we'll get on home to our US termites. So in the US, we have a variety of termites. Here, when I say subterranean, they are all heterotermitidae. We have none of the other non-subterranean now termites. But we have a variety of different termites, primarily in the southern US. But there is some diversity out there, as you see across here. We have our dampwood termites. These are primarily in the southwest and west coast. They're not considered a pest, really have this western distribution, but some of these get very large. These soldiers are very, very large and can be almost the size of your pinky. Very interesting large termites. Our drywood termites are generally coastally distributed, so they need that high humidity. So they're going to be in areas where it's easy for them to survive. There are many different pest species. We'll be covering drywood termites extensively throughout this, but these are primarily a problem in these coastal regions, although they are imported into other parts of the US and can become a problem for a shorter time there. We have higher termites. These are found mostly in Texas to California and southern Florida, so southwest and Florida. There are some pests. The desert termites in southwest Texas are out there feeding on grass and competing with some of the livestock out there. We do have a native nozzlehead termite, Termites here. It's often confused with the conehead termites of the tropics, but this is out in the desert. They'll kind of come up and forage above ground at nighttime, but they can commonly be found under rocks and under different areas. So the conehead termite, as I talked about earlier, is also an invasive species here in the United States. So it's a major pest in the neotropics, has a wide variety of food sources and very fast-growing colonies. It's been intercepted in U.S. ports 118 times between 1984 and 2011, so it's definitely knocking on our door here in the U.S. And then in 2001, it was discovered in Dania Beach. So it's very likely that it came from an infested boat. So a boat pulled into a harbor, had a full termite nest in there. They then flew one night and they're attracted to lights. They flew up onto shore, began to start a new colony there. They were eradicated, and they thought it was successful at the time, although they found them again 15 years later in 2016, 13 miles away, and very close to an area where a lot of the material had been dumped, near a dump where they took a lot of this old material. So genetic studies found that this is actually derived from the same colony or from the same location. So it's very likely that the eradication attempt did not occur. The only other explanation is if the exact boat moved the exact colony twice, 15 years apart. So it's very likely that this was the same introduction. We also have a variety of our U.S. subterranean termites, now considered heterotermitidae. Our major pests that we consider are Coptotermes formosanus in the southeastern U.S., Reticulotermes flavipes is the eastern subterranean termite, and Reticulotermes hesperus, and there's kind of a species complex out there is the western subterranean termite. So a little bit about the Formosan subterranean termite. So its name implies it's not native here, so it's native to Eastern Asia. It likely returned to the United States in ships after World War II from Hawaii and China. And interestingly, its genetic background showed a lab mate of mine at Texas A&M when I was there did a very robust genetic study looking across the genome of these termites and comparing to termite material from its native range. He found a more complicated invasion history where there was a bridgehead effect in Hawaii. So there was an introduction of termites into Hawaii probably in the 1880s, corresponding well to the trade and patterns that we know. From there, this formed a new kind of Hawaiian population that I'm simulating here with this purple, as red and blue go and make a new population. This was then introduced from Hawaii into the United States. So this bridgehead effect is the introduction of a species from an already invasive population rather than its native population. At some point, there was also a second introduction from mainland China and somewhere further east, like Florida, and these together blended together and were spread all across the United States to make the population we have now. It's also invaded Hawaii, Japan, and the southeastern US. So because of this kind of genetic mixing, it's able to get past that bottleneck effect and is really one of the top 100 worst invasive species. This bridgehead effect is very common in invasive species with things like fire ants were brought to the United States from South America. And since then, we've shipped them out to places like Australia rather than coming directly from South America. I also want to introduce the Asian subterranean termite, kind of the tropical cousin of the Formosan subterranean termite, Coptotermes gestroi. It's very similar in appearance, as you can tell from my very poor picture here. There's a slight difference in gestroi, has a slightly sunken head. There's also a different number of hairs in the fontanelle, but if you're ever questioning, the city of New Orleans has a great identification service. If you send specimens in, Eric Guidry here in the building can tell you exactly what it is in seconds almost. This species, though, is native to Southeastern Asia and is invasive around the world. What's important is in 3 places, in Taiwan, Hawaii, and South Florida, these 2 species occur together where they never had been in overlapping ranges. And what they found in these areas is that hybridization can occur. So these alates, when they fly at the same time, will hybridize. Initially, the colonies grew faster. And since this time, these hybrids have been found in the field. So this is concerning as people move termites around the US all the time. It's only a matter of time before they're moved here. This also gives the ability for this Coptotermes gestroi, the tropical or Asian subterranean termite, to move further north if it takes on some of those heat tolerance characteristics of the Formosan. And it's more voracious, if you can believe it, than Formosan termites, and also reacts to treatments in different ways. So it's important to know what we have in different areas. We also think about invasive termites in the United States, but some of our termites have also invaded the other parts of the world. So Reticulotermes flavipes, native to eastern US, has been found across Europe and France, Austria, Germany, and Italy. Ironically, it was actually initially described in Vienna. So it's species description, as I talked about, whoever describes it first is the one that the name sticks with. And so that first description was an invasive population that was brought back to a greenhouse in Vienna. When looking at some of the molecular analysis, we were also able to track the population or the trade pattern when France owned Louisiana as a colony. We can see over those 17th and 18th centuries, New Orleans was a major trading port, and we can see genetically that there's a resemblance between the termites in New Orleans and those collected in port cities in France. And I'll pass it back to Carrie to zoom in even more into here in Louisiana.
Yes, so we are going very local here. So here in Louisiana, we have 5 species of subterranean termites, including the very invasive Formosan subterranean termite. And really the subterranean termites is going to be the bulk of what we talk about during this homeowner series, primarily because of the economic damage that Formosan subterranean termites can produce. But we also, we deal with drywood termites as well in Louisiana. We have 4 species of drywood termites that are found here. So when we talk about subterranean termites, we have to recognize that there are some vast differences between our native Reticulotermes colonies and Formosan subterranean termites. Okay, so native termites, they do not have as big of colonies as you will find in Formosan subterranean termites. So there will be more individual termites within a Formosan colony than there will a native colony. The soldiers are also much more aggressive, and there's more of them in the colony. So the soldier proportion is much higher in a Formosan subterranean termite colony than our native colonies. And actually, our poor native termites, they have the reputation now of kind of having wimpy soldiers in their colonies. When we interact with a native subterranean termite colony, it can be very difficult to find a soldier. Whereas if you're interacting or breaking open a mud tube of a Formosan colony, a bunch of soldiers will come pouring out and really show their aggressive nature. They have this white fluid they will secrete from their head to help defend their colony as well. Native termites don't do that. Their swarm season is slightly different. So our native colonies will swarm during the day from January to April, whereas we are now in the swarm season for Formosan subterranean termites. So they will swarm in the evenings and they're attracted to lights. They'll be swarming from now till July, really. Another big difference is Formosan subterranean termites are capable of building aerial nests that don't have any contact with the soil. It can be rare, it can be difficult to prove because they are so cryptic, but it can happen. Okay, so morphologically, when talking about morphology, we always want to talk about soldiers and aliens, right? Because all the workers kind of look alike anyway. So with our native subterranean termites, here we have the mandible structure of our Hagani, Virginicus, and Flavipes here. And you can see in these pictures that the curvature of these mandibles are slightly different for each species. Okay, but the main thing here is that they are all considered subterranean termites. The aliens can also look quite different from each other with our native subs. So we have Reticulotermes tibialis, Hagani, Virginicus, and Flavipes. And one thing about these is you may notice that tibialis and Flavipes look very similar to each other in their body shape, size, color. But to tell them apart, the easiest thing to do is to look at their legs. Actually, so they will have this white portion on their legs, a very long portion here for Flavipes, and a very short portion of white here on the legs for tibialis. So we always say tibialis is wearing socks, where Flavipes is wearing their stockings. And if you really want to get to the nitty gritty, you would need a microscope for this, definitely. But there are ways to tell these species apart by looking at the distance from a compound eye to a simple eye, indicated by those red arrows. So the soldiers with our subterranean termites, it's actually pretty easy to tell them apart. I've already talked about how aggressive the Formosan soldiers can be and how their behavior can be a telltale sign of, being a Formosan colony. But morphologically, the Formosan soldiers will have more of a teardrop-shaped head, whereas our native subterranean termite soldiers will have a more rectangular-shaped head. And the Formosan soldiers will also have a pair of sharp, slender mandibles at the tip of their head, whereas the mandibles of our native subterranean termites are pretty blunt and thick. When we're looking at alates, the reproductives, if you look at the wings of an alate of a Formosan subterranean termite, you will see something very cool. It is covered with thousands and thousands of these little tiny hairs. So that can be a very telltale sign that what you're dealing with is Coptotermes. And here we have the lustrous, beautiful termite queen of the colony here. So you can kind of see her body size in relation to other members of the colony. You can see here workers are tending to her. She's actually laying an egg in this picture, which is actually really cool. And her entire body is engorged. She is completely full of eggs. And we've talked about how this is an invasive termite species, and Mark's already touched on them coming here after World War II. But if we look at the history of New Orleans and it being a major port city, there were some major military installations in 1945 here that are highlighted in red on this map. You can see where the Michoud plant is, the port of embarkation. We have where the Lakefront Airport is, and this Camp Leroy Johnson, which coincidentally is right across from our building now, which is fantastic. So World War II ends in 1945. This species was not discovered in Louisiana until the late 1960s. So we're talking about an invasive cryptic species that likes to stay hidden underground with 2 decades of interrupted spread. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And the Formosan subterranean termite loves New Orleans. Okay, we have a subtropical climate. It's nice and hot, it's humid, it's very soupy outside some days. And they're a cryptic species. They like to stay hidden. They're subterranean, so they live underground or inside of trees. And we have wood sources everywhere. We love to build things with wood. We have a lot of wood construction, a lot of historic wood construction as well. But on top of that, there's a lot of wood debris under our buildings. So when land is cleared or something is rebuilt, contractors aren't necessarily going to be removing all of the old wood debris before building right on top of it. And of course, these termites are going to feed on anything containing cellulose, which means that there is a lot of termite pressure here in Louisiana. So with this map, we can see the relative termite pressure throughout the United States. So areas like Hawaii, Louisiana, the Gulf South, and even places in California, you have a very high termite pressure, meaning that you can have a lot of individual termite colonies in a relatively a relatively small area. Okay, whereas you get up to North Dakota, you really are not going to have the same kind of termite pressure because of climate. And the Formosan subterranean termite has had a huge impact on the city of New Orleans. Like I said, we have a lot of historic structures and a lot of historic trees and ornamental trees that just make for iconic landscaping within our city. So we're dealing with damage with that, but also there's been a history of alate swarms in this city that have actually impacted nighttime activities. I remember when I moved here, I was told that, well, yeah, if there's a ball game at a park and it's nighttime and the lights are on, a lot of times they would have to pause the game for a half an hour to an hour while the termites were swarming, and then they could get back to playing. So, these massive alate swarms have been quite disruptive. And there's also damage to our trees, not just with damaging the aesthetic for the city, but also damage from falling trees and weakened structures as well. And all of the damage that these termites have done, not just aesthetics or preserving history, but the annual cost of termite infestation treatments and repairs was just astronomical by the late 1990s. So, and this really made headlines locally and nationally, like the city needed help with termite control. So, federal funding was given starting in 1998 as an initiative called Operation Full Stop. And this initiative lasted all the way till 2012, and it involved federal funding for not just our organization, but also the USDA, LSU, other universities, pest management professionals, and property owners and tenants. So there was a lot of moving parts and pieces to this program with a lot of different stakeholders. The goal of this program was to have a large area-wide termite control strategy in place to reduce these termite colony numbers, which in turn would protect structures and would protect trees. There was also a lot of fundamental research involved to help us improve termite control technologies. There was a lot of technology transfer and education as well. One major component of Operation Full Stop was the use of bait technology. Now, liquid termiticides were also used in this, but a very large component was using baits throughout the French Quarter to eliminate termite colonies. As you can see on this map here, in addition to having in-ground bait stations throughout the quarter, they also had monitoring stations along most of the intersections within the French Quarter to monitor for reinvading colonies and termite activity and all that good stuff. We also monitored alates during each swarm season on a daily basis to give us a relative abundance of termites in the French Quarter. There were a lot of building inspections top to bottom as well. Infested trees were also treated, sometimes with bait, sometimes with a liquid foam injection. And the huge research component of this project was to be able to delineate these colonies, so be able to track their foraging territories, tell different colonies apart. Some buildings, you had just one termite colony infesting it. Other buildings, you could have 5. You just never knew. So we delineated termite colonies by both mark-release recapture methods and genetic analysis. So genetic analysis is just like what it says. You can take termites samples from 2 different locations, look at their DNA, and be able to tell the colonies apart. Whereas with mark-release recapture methods, you would take termites from one area of a known infestation, take them back to the lab, force feed them filter paper that had a dye in it. So they would change all these different colors. They kind of look like Skittles running around. But then you would take them back to the field, release them in the same spot where you had collected them. And then from there, you can check neighboring monitoring stations and neighboring areas to see how far they would travel to determine the foraging territory. So what we observed during Operation Full Stop was, first off, the number of alates throughout the French Quarter, they were drastically reduced. So they were reduced by at least 50%. Termite activity in the bait stations was also reduced by over 98%. However, building inspections did show isolated pockets of infested trees and some above ground infestations. But really, the overall termite pressure within the French Quarter was greatly reduced. And I think it really shows, what kind of work it takes to really do a area-wide treatment like that. Okay, so let's move on a little bit to drywood termites. Okay, so drywoods are vastly different than subterranean termites. So we're looking at 2 different families here, Calotermidae versus Heterotermidae. Subterranean termites, of course, nest underground and inside trees, whereas drywood colonies, a drywood termite colony will live within the wood that they are feeding on. Okay, so they don't require any contact with the soil, like the subterranean termite colonies do. They get all the moisture that they need from the wood that they're eating, the humidity in the air, and also from their own metabolism. But because they're not going to be underground and can just forage wherever, they're going to be very limited in their colony size. So you might see a couple thousand termites in a drywood colony tops, whereas with a subterranean colony, they can be in the several million. Okay, so morphologically, we can see some very vast differences here within the soldier caste. So we have the drywood soldier on the left and the subterranean soldier on the right. And as you can see here, it's the mandibles on the drywood soldier look very, very robust, very thick. And they have these teeth on the insides of their mandibles as well. We're not going to see that with the subterranean soldiers. They're going to have very smooth, very slender mandibles. We also can see a difference in the pronotums. Okay, so the pronotum is this plate-like structure right behind the head. It covers the majority of the thorax, but really it's kind of analogous to what a neck would be like on any other animal. It's what we would call the neck. And on a drywood soldier, on a drywood termite actually, it's going to be as wide as the width of the head, whereas on a subterranean termite, it's going to be narrower than the width of the head. However, not all drywood termites are created equally, right? So we have seen these very thick mandibles with these marginal teeth on the inside of those mandibles and incisitermes, but cryptotermes on the left here looks very, very different. So they have these very hard sclerotized heads with these very tiny mandibles up here. You could barely see them in this picture. So the methods of protection for the colony are very different. With mandibles, it's very easy to imagine them just closing them, pinching them, and being able to defend that way. Whereas cryptotermes over here will use their head capsule to block entry into the gallery system. So they can block galleries or they can block any kind of entrance into their gallery system from predators and invaders. Drywood alates. So the ones that we deal with here in Louisiana include species of incisitermes and cryptotermes and chalotermes as well. As you can see here, different colors, different body shapes, but there is one that I do want to pay a little bit more attention to, and that is this Incisiterme snyderi. And the reason why I want to pay a little bit more attention to it is because it has the same swarm season as Formosan subterranean termites. So when a homeowner finds a swarming termite in their home around this time of year, you kind of need to know what you're dealing with. Control methods for subterranean termites and drywood termites are going to be so very different. I think that is part 3, 3 of this homeowner series. So to be able to tell the difference when you're looking at these alates, first, let's look again at those the pronotums, right? That neck-like structure right behind the head. On the drywood termite, again, it's going to be just as wide as the width of the head, whereas with subterranean termites, it's going to be narrower. Okay, you're not going to see the hairs on the wings on a drywood termite the way that you would on a Formosan subterranean termite alate. Another thing is the cross veins on the wings. This is something that subterranean alates don't have, but drywoods do. So let's take a look at those cross veins and what they look like. So here we have on the far left, remember the Formosan subterranean termite's going to have all those thousands of little tiny hairs on the wing. Our native subterranean termites will not have hairs on the wing. And drywood termites have veins that actually run across the top 2 veins along that wing. So it looks like vertical hash marks along the top edge of that wing. And those are called cross veins. Okay, so we do have a lot more information and some good color photographs in downloadable PDF form on our website. And Stacy, if you're able to pop that link in the chat and people can access it as they wish, that would be perfect. And I appreciate it. But yes, this is a free resource for everybody to use if you wish. Okay, so let's talk about life cycles for a little bit for subterranean termites and then drywood termites. So I think if you're here in Louisiana and you're local, you're very familiar with these guys flying around at nighttime this time of year, right? So let's start there. Okay, so swarming alates, they will have their termite date night. They will come out in droves sometimes, and they're attracted to, say, street lights or light neon signs and things like that. And the males and the females will pair up, and you'll be able to see them. The male will follow right behind the female, and she's looking for a new house to start a brand new colony. So once they mate, they'll shed their wings. Their wings are perforated, so they'll go ahead and shed those. You have the queen, egg-laying beast of the colony. That's all she does. That is her job. And here you can see a batch of eggs right here. So then we have the brood. So we have eggs, and once they hatch out, they're actually called larvae. And the larvae are going to go through a series of molts, and they are either going to become soldiers or workers or nymphs. Okay, so within subterranean termites, the worker is considered a terminal caste. So once you go through a series of molts and you're a worker, you're going to live and breathe and die a worker. You're not going to all of a sudden turn into a soldier or a nymph or an alate or anything like that. So it's actually the nymphs that will become alates the next time you're ready to swarm. Okay. And the interesting thing about this, so the king and the queen can live a long time, but they're not going to live forever. And at some point, she's going to slow down a little bit. She's not going to be producing as many eggs as she once did. And the colony might become so big that it's hard to keep up with the demand of new termites for that colony. So there can actually be supplemental and replacement reproductives within this colony to help supplement the egg production and the colony growth. So this is the normal part of a colony life cycle. You can actually have multiple pairs of kings and queens within a colony. Now, the drywood termite life cycle is a little bit different. Again, we will have alates that swarm, and the males and females pair up and start new colonies. So you will have a queen and a king. They're monogamous, by the way, so that is quite romantic, I think. But the worker caste, these are called technically suitor gates. Most people still call them workers. But a suitor gate is, so technically it is translated into a false worker. And all that means is that it can then molt into soldiers and alates. So the worker caste here is not a terminal caste. Even if you molt and you become a worker later on, you can molt again and become a soldier if it's needed for the colony. So that's the big difference there. And as far as behavior is concerned, I'm going to let Mark take it from here, talking about eusociality.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're going to zoom kind of back out and talk about eusociality as a concept. So termites, as we've shown, are eusocial, but we could define this. And this characteristic is common across some bees, some wasps, all ants, and all termites. It's defined as having three characteristics. They have cooperative brood care. This brood is of the social insects, the young of the social insects, especially when gathered in a special chamber. You see ant brood here. There's a reproductive division of labor. So as Carrie's mentioned, that queen is the only egg layer. So this is the one laying eggs in the colony. Everyone else is not able to reproduce on their own. The queen becomes physiogastric. This is a greatly enlarged abdomen to accommodate the very large ovaries needed to keep up with that many eggs for production. And they have overlapping generations. So they stick around in the colony for a long amount of time and not just stay with their offspring, but stay on for multiple generations. These three characteristics are the special characteristic eusociality. Other insects can be social. Things like earwigs have maternal care and they live somewhat socially. but they don't have all of these characteristics to get them up to that category of eusociality. So when we look in termites, all termites are eusocial. They're unique, though, from other eusocial insects because they consume cellulose. So they have this whole host of bacterial, archaeal, and eukaryotic symbionts in their gut. This is a video of some of the gut of a termite that I smashed on a microscope slide and zoomed in very close. So you can see it wiggling around there. So there's a whole world of little critters swimming around in the termite gut. It's very fascinating to put under a microscope and look around for all these different things. And these termites evolved from a cockroach-like ancestor. So this explains their aggregation behavior. They have these gut symbionts, but every time they molt, they have to recover their gut symbionts from a sibling. So after they molt, they clear out their gut fauna and molt that part of their gut as well, and have to regain or replant that gut fauna to continue to be able to feed on cellulose. They do this through trophallaxis. So trophallaxis is the exchange of regurgitated liquids between colony members. This can be stomodial, mouth to mouth, or proctodial, anus to mouth. In termites, some of these casts also can't feed themselves. So the larvae, their mandibles are not sclerotized. Sclerotized just means hardened or stiffened of the exoskeleton. So that's what makes a beetle crunch. It's very sclerotized. They also have soldiers that can't feed themselves, so their mandibles are so modified for defense, they're not capable of consuming wood anymore on their own. So these require trophallaxis, or feeding from the rest of the colony, to keep them alive. For colony defense, as we've talked about, the soldiers are morphologically adapted for this defense. They have those enlarged, hardened mandibles, as we've seen in many of our species, or the nozzle heads, as I showed with the tree termites or conehead termites. The phragmatic termites, as Carrie's described, are that cryptic defense with a modified modified body structure to block the nest entrance. And for termites, ants are their biggest enemy. So a lot of these adaptations are to fight off ants and other predators. These termites live in the dark and are mostly blind. They're able to communicate, though, with chemical cues and with vibrational cues. So chemical cues they use include pheromones. Pheromones are a chemical released by an individual that affects on the behavior or physiology of other individuals of the same species. These pheromones are often produced in the frontal gland in soldiers and can be used for alarm and different things. They also have vibroacoustic cues. So this can be the tapping of the head or the abdomen to alert the colony. These can be produced both by workers and soldiers. And so we have a video here. Whoops, go back and play this video. So we have a video here of some of these vibrational cues, which I forgot to do a sound check, so I hope you can hear it. And if not, I promise they're tapping there. So as they begin to tap, you'll hear kind of a repeated tapping-like pattern. That's their way of communicating. So you can hear the vibrational cue. If not, it just sounds like a tapping sound, kind of like a woodpecker or something with a very fast tapping pattern. But this tapping pattern is able to then be transmitted through their wood substrate that they're feeding on and be able to be transmitted throughout the colony. Termites also engage in foraging. So this is a very close-up video by Ed Freitag, a member of our group here who's retired, but we're lucky to still have around part-time. But what you can see here is these termites are not very good at consuming the wood on their own. An individual termite has to rip it apart fiber by fiber to get this wood apart. But when you have a colony of millions of individuals, they can cause a lot of damage in a short time. Things like drywood termites with only a couple thousand are relatively slow going and are less damaging immediately, but can be very damaging over time as there's multiple colonies. Termites, as we mentioned, feed on any cellulose material. This can be wood, paper, anything that's made of cellulose. Cellulose is an indigestible carbohydrate that makes up the plant cell wall and vegetable fibers. So we don't feed on cellulose. We have our Caesar salad and they'll grate some Parmesan cheese on there, but they never grate a pine log on there and, have some pencil shavings put into your salad. But we don't eat that because we can't break it down. And the termites can't either without those endosymbionts. As termites forage, they connect together different food resources. So they're constantly looking for new food resources. This is why your house is constantly at risk of these termites around in different areas. If termites found a dead log in the forest floor that would sustain their colony for the next 30 years, they're still going to look for more foraging sites. They're never satisfied and never content in a single resource. They're always looking for new resources, and your house is a great resource. These resources are connected together by tunnels underground, so you can see the complicated tunnel network in this area here. And so as we mentioned, they tunnel to acquire resources. This is them tunneling in a planar arena. So you can see a time lapse of them digging this tunnel. It's a relatively slow process, but this gives them physical protection from ants and other enemies and protection from drying out and other unfavorable conditions. The individual mechanism of tunneling, as you see here, the individual termites are able to pick up these pieces of sand and deposit them in different areas. So again, this is a very slow process individually, but they have millions of termites that are working around the clock making these tunnels work. So you can see they grab the piece of sand at the front of the tunnel and bring this back as they go. So this is very slow. We also have an example of a mud tube here. So this is one of their protective mud tubes. We break it open with a pen so you can see what's going on inside. Again, these termites are blind, so it's not the exposure to the light that they don't like, it's the exposure to a difference in humidity, and they can feel the difference in air pressure. So they react and they hide. Once they deem there's no immediate threat, they begin to come out and assess the damage and begin to rebuild. The soldiers will kind of peek out. These are Formosan subterranean termites. There's a large number of very brave soldiers. So the soldiers are out there patrolling, but the soldiers can't move the sand themselves. So the workers are doing the work. The soldiers are just overseeing and supervising in case of an ant or any other kind of predator that shows up. As the time lapse goes on, it lasts about 10 to 12 hours as this goes. The termites will completely rebuild this tunnel. So if you find a mud tunnel going up your house and you break it open a little bit and don't see any termites, wait a couple days, and if they rebuilt it in time, this tunnel still might be active. If you wait a couple days and you don't see them, they might not be active in that tunnel. Not to say they're not in the house anymore, but they're no longer using that as a tunnel as they go. And then I'll pass it back to Carrie for a kind of final wrap up with the economic importance.
Yeah, so again, this whole homeowner series is going to focus mainly on subterranean termites and their biology, behavior, damage that they can cause, and what we do to treat them, and what you would want to know about them as a homeowner. Okay, so your house, for most people, your house is your most financially important investment that you make in your life, and you want to be able to protect it. So these termites are taking a huge bite out of our national budget, actually. So nationwide, we're talking about a $4 billion business as far as treatment and damage and repairs goes. So multi-billion. Okay, so first off, we want you to be comfortable with knowing thy enemy. You have to know about termites in order to know how best to treat them. So during our seminar series, we're also going to see how an inspection is done. So this is what we'll be talking about on Thursday. So how an inspection is performed and what to expect during a termite inspection of your home. Part 3 will be next week, and we're going to learn about pest species and how they're treated in your home, right? I've already kind of alluded to drywood termites are being treated much differently than subterranean termites in your house. And then part 4, we're going to talk all about trees and how we protect them against Formosan subterranean termites using a couple different methods. So we want to see everybody back here for the next 3 parts. And if there are any questions, you can put them in the chat. But while we're waiting on people to ask questions in the chat, Mark, I'd love to know what this picture is all about.
Yeah, this was a Mardi Gras float from about a year ago. So this was in the Muses Parade here in New Orleans, and they had a tented house. So stay tuned for part 3, and you'll see how this is done and why this is done. But they had an exterminator on the front, some hungry termites on the side, and what a typical tented house is on there as well.
I love it.
I also want to plug our 4th one. We're trying to get some participation here locally. So if you live in the area and want to come in person for this webinar on April 22nd from 5:30 to 7, we're going to have this in person here at our administration building, 2100 Leon C. Simon Drive in New Orleans. Go ahead and scan that QR code or email us to let us know we're coming. We want to make sure we have a good group there to make sure this is going forward. But yeah, let's see. Stacey, are there any questions in the chat?
Yes, but before I get to the question, the termite guide that Dr. Catone talked about, people mentioned that they can't copy the link, so I will email it to everyone who attended today. So don't worry, we'll get it sent to you.
Oh, thank you very much.
There is one question, and that question is, are there any termites in Canada?
Yeah, there are termites in Canada. As as Americans often think Canada is further north than the US in general, but there are plenty of parts in Canada that are just as far north as the US. So personally, I've collected termites in northern Michigan. So if you go across the lake over there, I'm sure you can find them in Ontario and some of those areas. In Toronto, there was a long established invasive population where they brought termites up there with different materials and have brought them up there. The interesting part is because they brought them with them in a small number, they had no aggression to other colonies. So they had sort of a super colony of these invasive termites up in Canada and in Toronto. So they can get up north with the way the climate change is going. That's their range is surely going to keep going further north. So we have these light winters up there if they're able to survive over time. So they are already in Canada natively and invasively, and certainly with trade and transportation, they'll be spread to more areas as it goes.
Okay, that's the only question I see in the chat. So once again, I want to take the time to thank everyone for joining Dr. Janowicki and Dr. Catone today. Please join us for part 2 next week. I think it's next Thursday, if I am correct. Yep, April 10th. And we'll be talking about inspections and conducive conditions at the same time. So 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Great. Thank you, Stacia.
Thank you.